So not only do we have the setup of the father and son meeting for the first time in 3 years, but we understand where the son is coming from. Like, he thinks this guy is the bomb. Like, he thinks he's good looking, he seems charming, this kid idolizes him in many ways. And we're going to see how that is completely destroyed in the space of 1 page. So that's our setup. Then we have our event, our conflict is presented, right? The precipitating event. The precipitating event is they go into a bar, and right away it's revealed that the father's kind of a jerk, right? You know, he's yelling at this guy, he's clapping his hands at him, and immediately, even though the nice thing about this story is he never says what he's thinking, the narrator never says what he's thinking, but even as the reader, you're horrified. So you're almost like, you become the kid, you become the boy in this story as you're reading. You're embarrassed for the guy as he's, you know, saying, "Garçon, camarere," all my terrible Italian. Sorry about that, I should have apologized that before I even read. So this is, the conflict is presented, right? This dad is a bit of a jerk. Then we have the escalation, and what the other sort of reason why I wanted to use this story is this is absolutely pattern repetition. It's the same thing over and over and over and over. He goes into each bar, he does the same thing, he gets drunker and drunker and drunker. He says, my favorite line is this, is when he says, 2 Bibson geef-eaters instead of 2 Bibson geef-eaters. He said 2 geef-eater Bibsons. Even I'm messing it up now. Anyway, so it's just sort of like, it just sort of increases. So this is the escalation or the buildup. It's very easy to see in this story, okay? And then finally you reach even the last place they kind of get kicked out of. And then we start hitting our climax, which for the climax, you know how we were talking about before, is like you're creating a pattern and then the pattern needs to be broken somehow. So what's happening over and over again, the same pattern is happening. They're entering the bar, the dad's being belligerent, he's drinking more, and then he says, "Let's get out of here, Charlie," and he takes Charlie to the next bar. And he takes Charlie to the next bar, and he takes Charlie to the next bar. He does it 4 times in a row, which is even like 1 more than the magical 3. Like, Cheever really only needed to do this 3 times, but he did it 1 more time just so like you knew there was no hope. Then what happens is, you know, he's like, "Let's go, Charlie," and then the son stops it. He stops the pattern, and he says, "I have to get my train." Now, it's not said in the story if he really needs to get his train, or if he just wants to get the hell out of there. But either way, he is stopping the pattern that the father has created. And then, so this is sort of, he can't get away from the father fast enough, pretty much. You know, and even the dad has one last sort of tussle, and he even tries to do something with the, one last sort of bad behavior, tries to do something bad with the newsstand guy. You know, his goddamn no good 10-cent afternoon papers. It'd be nice if there was 10-cent papers. There weren't afternoon papers, there aren't anymore. But, and then he says, "I have to go, Daddy, it's late." "Now, just wait a second, Sonny, just wait a second, I want to get a rise out of this chap." "Goodbye, Daddy," I said. And he says, "And I went down the stairs and got my train, and that was the last time I saw my father." So the wonderful thing about this story is the same thing in The Cat in the Hat where we had the 2 pictures. The very first sentence in this story is, "The last time I saw my father was in Grand Central Station." And then he ends the story with, "I went down the stairs and got my train, and that was the last time I saw my father." And by using the same sentence, you feel, again, all the weight of everything that's happened to this character, and you sort of realize when you go back to the beginning again, like, oh, in the beginning, the last time I saw my father, you're just like, oh yeah, the last time I saw him, but I'm going to see him again in 2 weeks. And then when he says this, the last time I saw my father, you realize he never saw this guy again. Like, ever, ever again. Like, he hated his guts. Or it means that the dad died. So it means that it's just interesting that he can do that so sort of wonderfully by having that repetition from sort of the beginning to the end. It sort of completes this circle in this really, really nice way. So most often, the mistake I see as an editor is one of these 5 steps is missing in a short story, which gives the story really a lack of focus and a lack of narrative drive. Like either the setup is there, or there's no build-up, and then there's suddenly a resolution, or they suddenly throw a climax in, or sometimes they're out of order and people start with a climax, and then, you know, sort of, I mean, that you can do that sometimes, but it's tricky, then you have to sort of do some really complicated maneuvering afterwards. Sometimes there's no climax. There's a build-up and there's no climax, and nothing goes anywhere. So you have to really think about with your own writing is sort of like, how do I make all these 5 steps happen? I used to have a teacher in 6th grade named Mrs. Sledge, and the way she was the very first person to actually ever describe this to me. And she was reading The Most Dangerous Game to us. I don't know if you know that sort of classic short story. But what she would do is she would draw the arc of short stories on the chalkboard like this. Like she would sort of say, oh, it's either like sort of smooth beginning in this, or like The Most Dangerous Game, there's a slow build up and then it's like boom, it ends like this. So sort of she would draw these sort of like elaborate graphs that would kind of show every sort of step of the way. I've got a friend, Justin Cronin, who's a fantastic short story writer, and he sort of talks about structure as the magic triangle of happiness, and this is what he draws. He sort of does the same thing, but he is a triangle, right? And then he does this. He sections it off. So he is saying is that the sort of time that you should spend on the story should be like equally. There's like 1/3 of it is the build-up and the sort of setting, and then the climax should be 1/3, and then the resolution should be 1/3. So almost think of it, your structure as a triangle and building it. And you sort of, his thing was like you want to spend equal sort of spaces or pages for that. For me, I think about it as an on-ramp and an off-ramp. You know, you want to get onto the highway and you want to get off the highway when you reach your destination. And oftentimes, I'm led onto highways in my reading that I never get off, or or I suddenly sort of am just thrown on there, like by helicopter or something. I wanted a more easy sort of ride on and off. But what's most important, of course, is that a change occurs in a short story, and your structure can really help you present that change to a reader. So sometimes the story comes first, and sometimes the structure comes first, but it always must be there in order for a story to succeed. So I'm just going to sort of tell you guys about a writing exercise that I often give people after this lecture that you can take home and try yourself, which I think is a useful sort of use of this. And I call it the 5-sentence short story, which you basically take these 5 things, right? Setup, precipitating event, build up, climax, and resolution, but you do each with just 1 sentence. So if I was rewriting, like I could do this, rewrite your reunion in 5 sentences, right? The first thing would be, I was meeting my dad in Grand Central Station for the first time in 3 years. Precipitating event. The first thing my father did was bring me into a bar and get into a fight. He took me to another bar and we got into another fight. And then one more, and comma, and then another bar and got to another fight. Finally I said, my train's here, I need to leave. And then, the resolution, I never saw my father again. So sort of, very sort of crappily try and squeeze reunion into 5 sentences, but it would be something like this. And so oftentimes what students do is they'll sort of take this, they'll write it out in 5 sentences, and they'll see that there's an arc. You can create an arc just with 5 sentences, and then sometimes they'll take that 5-sentence short story and they'll build it out into an entire short story. So it's sort of a good way to start, particularly when you're a beginning writer, to sort of use a sort of strong structure for something. And then, and an interesting thing, oftentimes when I'm editing people is I say, just have something happen, have something happen twice, and the 3rd time, have it happen but differently. And then you've created a short story. It's sort of, remember like we were saying before, joke, setup, build up, whoa, setup, build up, and punchline. And that's pretty much where I end. So I'm going to open it up to questions. If anyone has questions about structure, or about anything I talked about today, or about short stories in general, or one story, I'd be glad to answer them. And then we can all have wine. Does anyone have any thoughts on this?